Hello and welcome to the final video in a series that has hopefully taught you how to master the art of war in Total War 3 Kingdoms. As massive armies clash on the battlefield, fighting for dominance, there are two kinds of warlords. The ones that rely on numerical superiority and brute force, and those that rely on cunning execution and finesse. While some tyrants may not care for the numbers lost after every battle, a commander with a strategy and the tactics to execute them will always come out as the victor. So, here are 3 battlefield tactics to master. The Hammer and Anvil. This is the simplest and most effective battlefield tactic that needs to employ no more than 2 units. One, the Anvil, that is able to stand steady and pin the enemy, and another, the Hammer, that is able to move swiftly to attack the same enemy unit from behind. Since you essentially need 2 units for every 1 that the enemy has to execute the Hammer and Anvil on a per unit level, you must be quick and decisive when trying to pull this off. Your Anvil must be spread wide to make up for any gaps that might be made as a result of units assigned as the Hammer, and your Anvil must have a decent morale to ensure it doesn't break before the Hammer arrives. It needs a decent ranged block chance to avoid being whittled down by ranged fire before lines meet, and it needs to have a high melee block chance and high melee evasion stats to ensure it takes minimal damage as it waits for the Hammer to hit. These are all stats that are visible on the unit details cards, and typically you'll find medium and heavy spear guard fit the bill perfectly while balancing cost and effectiveness. Your Hammer has to be quick, and ideally it brings with it a high melee charge bonus. This means that cavalry is the ideal Hammer, and specifically shock cavalry does the trick best, though either type works better than infantry. The combination of a pinning unit and a rear charge has a devastating effect on enemy morale, especially when the charge comes in cleanly and causes a great deal of damage. And if one strike of the Hammer doesn't do the trick, you can always pull your cavalry back and bring it back down on the same enemy unit a second time to quickly finish them off. A good way to execute the Hammer and Anvil across a large line is to have the rear charges spread across the line. This spreads the damage around the battlefield and opens up the potential for the army losses morale debuff to kick in. Failing that, at least it helps your soldiers across the board. Unfortunately, since the Hammer and Anvil is a relatively simple to execute tactic, it is also one that the enemy is often ready for. Cavalry should be hidden before bringing down the Hammer if possible, and if not, your cavalry should try to distract potential screening spears and enemy cavalry, or should otherwise split up so some units can fulfill the Hammer duties while the others act effectively as bait. You should also be careful about what units you're charging into and the angles you're charging in with. Enemy spears and halberds are weak targets if you charge them from behind, but if they see your cavalry coming and quickly turn around to face them before you can respond, you might see some significant losses. Execute the Hammer and Anvil with caution. It is a simple and extremely effective tactic, but be prepared for your cavalry to be screened off and adapt accordingly. The Single Envelopment. Yet another simple to execute tactic with great potential results. The Single Envelopment hopes to apply an overwhelming amount of pressure on one side of the battlefield in order to break it faster, allowing your forces to fold over and envelop the enemy army from the flanks. This can result in a cascading effect of damage and routing among the enemy units as the side you're enveloping from gets stronger with each passing moment. Whether using superior troops, greater numbers, or just a bit of extra attention, the Single Envelopment is easy to execute in stages. The first step is to pick a side and deploy accordingly. You don't have to stay committed to the side you pick, but doing so will save you time. Make sure your strongest troops are located there, while the rest of your line is able to hold the line and wait for the envelopment to complete. As you approach the enemy, or as they approach you if you want to play defensively, focus all of your ranged units on the same flank where you're strongest. Whether using artillery or archers and crossbows, bring down the morale and health of any units on that particular flank, especially those with better staying power. Apply enough pressure and the units on that side might break before you're even able to close the gaps. If not, you'll still have weakened them enough that they are likely to break within moments of making contact. get your charges and counter charges in, and blend in the use of some hammer and anvil tactics, and the next thing you know, the flank you focused your attention on has completely broken, freeing your own units up to now swivel around and rear charge the next unit over. Rinse and repeat, and in no time you'll have completely enveloped the enemy from the one side. This can also be done as a double envelopment coming from both flanks, and similar tactics can be used to break through the center of the enemy instead, peeling out towards either flank after breaking through. The trouble with single envelopment tactics is that they telegraph their intent more or less immediately. That is to say, your opponent can tell more or less immediately what you're planning on doing, and they can respond accordingly, changing their deployment to react to your attempts. You can try and keep a part of your overwhelming force hidden, or you can keep any cavalry that is essential to the move in the center of your deployment so that the enemy is unable to tell which flank you'll be applying the extra pressure to. If you stay nimble, you'll be able to successfully execute the single envelopment and quickly dispatch of enemy forces. The kill box. A simple but risky tactic to pull off, creating a kill box is a very effective way to focus down on and eliminate enemy units using your own ranged units. The creation of a kill box involves attacking the same enemy unit from multiple sides using multiple ranged units. At a larger scale, it involves sending your ranged units out to the flanks, exposing them greatly, but allowing them to fire into the backs and sides of enemy troops. This can be set up during deployment, using the terrain to hide the flanking ranged units, or your ranged troops can be moved into position after lines meet. This unobstructed line of fire ensures that more of the fired arrows and bolts hit the enemy, and though it still results in some friendly fire, it greatly reduces the losses you'll suffer as a result of it. Firing in from the sides also completely ignores block chances, as shields are likely to be facing forward. Now, keeping a unit of spears or cavalry near your ranged units is a good way to deter any enemy cavalry aggression, but having a unit on screening duty means one less unit directly engaging against the enemy. This tactic is best used when your own cavalry does not have free reign of the battlefield, when the enemy is low on cavalry, and when your army is extremely reliant on ranged superiority. When front lines meet, ranged units can often be wasted just sitting still, doing nothing, or worse, they can cause a tremendous amount of damage to your own friendly units. Wheeling them around the sides keeps these units active and effective, and once they're out of ammunition, if you're in desperate need of assistance, a rear charge from a ranged unit will cause morale damage to the enemy and might be enough to tip the balance in your favor. Another way to pull this off is to checkerboard your frontline melee units and your rear line of ranged units. Once lines meet, your ranged units will still be able to fire through the gaps, effectively creating small kill boxes per enemy melee unit. Exposed archers and crossbows are easily harassed and destroyed, and that makes this tactic a particularly dangerous one to attempt. Physical obstructions or city layouts can help shield your ranged units, but be very careful when trying to pull this one off. The proper execution of superior tactics on the battlefield will allow you to tip the slimmest of odds in your favor. The proper understanding of your units and how and when they perform at their best will allow you to stay nimble as you execute these 3 simple battlefield tactics, and using what you've learned here, you should be able to develop tactics of your own. From pincers to encirclements, and from ambushes to clever baiting maneuvers, keep exploring the various options you have to overwhelm the enemy with your wit, because that's what being a great general is about.